Welcome, everyone. This is Wayne Dorban, live from Northern Colorado, and we're going to do our third of our series on restoration agriculture, which we are doing on Wednesday nights. And Mark Shepard is our coach for this series. And Mark was with us by telephone 2 weeks ago. He was with us live last week, and he is absent tonight. But we have a little plan for it, and I'll give you a little more of that detail in just a second. Mark's actually stuck up on the Upper Peninsula in Michigan. And again, I don't know all the details of it, but he went up there this last weekend for a little family weekend break for Father's Day, and he has somehow gotten stuck on whatever island that he's at off of the Upper Peninsula area, and he's not able to actually get off until tomorrow. So we've chatted, and we have some amazing recorded presentations from him. Actually, one that you're going to be one of the very first people to see from the European Agroforestry event that Mark was a speaker at from just a couple weeks ago, and we're going to play that. And we're also going to have several other little recordings. Obviously, as always, we're excited about your questions and interaction that you'll all have with one another, both here and through the other different tools that we're going to be providing for you, or that we already have through the Economic Action Team. So I'm going to start by just doing a little bit of a review of what you've got available to you for the Economic Action Team, and just talk about some things that we've got going. So I'm going to show on the screen right now our secret Facebook group, which actually I just learned last night, or the night before last, as we were doing the aquaculture presentation for the team, that I thought that you would be able to come into this, you'd be able to look up Economic Action Team and join yourself. But guess what? It's a secret group. You actually can't just go there. We're going to have to add all of you. Right now we have over 200 members, so we're going to add those all manually. We'll get that done in the next day or two. And then you'll be able to come into this site. And what I hope happens is I hope you come in here and you decide to greatly interact with other folks. Excuse me. And you start to create partnerships and collaborations and all kinds of things. But again, I'm going to still have to go in and we are, and set that up for you. The other thing I want to show you, which you're all, if you aren't already members of, we will be soon, which is the Restoration Agriculture, what we call Smart Member site. It is a site where we are placing a number of different presentations. I'm scrolling on one portion of the screen now. If you're looking at this, you'll notice that this one, for example, right here says Sylvan 2016. That was a presentation that we've recorded that Mark did at Sylvandale Ranch earlier this year. That's actually not something that will be available for everyone. It is a purchase, and those people that attended that workshop get it as part of their attendance, and then we're going to be actually selling it to others. And again, one of the things we've said is that we're not going to be pitching here at all on the Economic Action Team presentations, but I just wanted to point that out. I mainly wanted to show you another portion of the site, however, where on a regular basis, almost daily, we add information. It's loading up right now here. And it's just from different articles that are out and about on the internet that we think have some use and value. Very interesting one here about a regenerative agriculture symposium that's coming up here in Colorado in September of this year. You can check that one out. And eventually, we're going to allow access to a lot of our team members to this site also, to allow them to be doing what we're calling speed blogging. And as you can see, we have 4 different pages here, and we add different articles. So if you were to click on any one of these, I'll just go up and do it here for the Regenerative Agriculture Conference. That just shows you, then you click once more and it'll actually just that quick, 2 clicks, take you to the website. So I'll go back to the site here and show that. We also have some downloads that you'll be able to get if you're interested in some of those. So again, if you aren't already a member of that site, send me an email, send us something, get with us, because you should be. And again, it's a free membership, and we have paid memberships also, but you should be able to be having a free membership. So I've shown the Facebook page and now the Smart Member Restoration Ag page. And that's probably enough for a little bit of a preface here. And I just want to thank my staff that's here helping. We've got Mark that's out in Bangladesh that's helping. We've got Jeffrey, who is actually muted because it's the middle of the night. He was whispering before because people are sleeping where he's at. And I think he's still in Croatia. However, he might be on his way to Portugal. He was telling me about watching the Euro Cup earlier today and how excited everybody is about that. I've got Stephanie here with me in the studio area. We've got Deb that's potentially out there. I didn't look to see if she's in on the line yet here, but she will be soon. So let me go back to the slides. So we're going to start this recorded presentation now. That we're going to start both an audio that you'll be able to hear, and we're going to go through slides. And this is going to be Mark speaking at the European Agroforestry Conference that just occurred very recently. So here we go.
Thank you very much, Christian, Rosa, Jerry, and it's quite an honor and a privilege to be invited to share here at this conference, especially to share the stage with the Agricultural Minister of France. Thank you very much for having me here. It was about 30 years ago that I was a student of ecology at Unity College in Maine. And when I was studying restoration ecology, I became rather disappointed with restoration ecology because I thought that I was going to learn how to restore ecosystems to health and vitality, and what I learned was how to apply herbicide and to fight against invasive species to take land out of agricultural production. We're stopping the growing of food in order to plant systems that were described by some biologist in 1835 and trying to arrest succession at that phase. It was also dependent on grant money and government money to happen, so I really became quite jaded with the whole restoration ecology part. And it was during those years that I discovered this book here, Tree Crops, by J. Russell Smith, originally written in 1926, and it was the first time that I had ever thought about these two words together, a permanent and agriculture. What if we had an agriculture that was permanent, ecologically permanent, what was sustainable forever and ever and ever and ever? Smith proposed that we begin a two-story agriculture. In his day, 50% of all annual crops were fed to livestock. It's more than that today. It's almost 80% in the USA. He proposed that we grow trees for seeds that we feed as livestock feed to our animals, have pastures underneath, and reserve our flattest, least erodible soils for annual crop agriculture. Really intrigued me and inspired me to investigate further. There was no internet. There were no examples of this happening anywhere that I knew of. The word agroforestry had not even been allowed into the language of the USA yet. And I ran into this fellow here, Bill Mollison, the coiner of the phrase permaculture, who wrote the book Permaculture, a designer's manual. His particular methodology has spread worldwide. I was inspired particularly by this phrase right here. Permaculture design, it's the ecological design methodology, first and foremost. It's to design permanent agriculture. Bingo, I'm inspired already. Then I heard him on a Australian public broadcasting television show saying in Australian, if anybody knows how to speak Australian, I'd like to hear you say this later on. He said the aim is to create systems that are ecologically sound and economically viable. So to me, that sounded like the magic of everything. If we can design an agriculture that is ecologically sound and economically profitable, that's what else should we do? So I dedicated the last 30 years of my life to doing exactly this. Advance with this, right? Through 30 years, instead of getting a job in the ecological restoration field, instead of getting into academia and doing more research, my wife and I decided to actually apply the knowledge on the land and pay our bills. We're going to be economically profitable. So we began acquiring real estate and practicing agroforestry. But instead of just agroforestry, as most of us are familiar with, we were practicing a biomimicry agroforestry, where instead of just planting a row of trees and having crops or grazing underneath, we were creating three-dimensional, fully functional ecosystems based on the natural plant communities around there. I came to call that restoration agriculture. Unlike what we heard earlier, where one of the speakers said that, well, we have to just understand that there's a trade-off between profitability and ecological services. Well, no, there isn't, if you do it in a certain way. And then I also heard somebody else, I have to laugh because one of my Canadian fellows, that the area for doing agroforestry in Canada is down here. Well, some of our properties are about 300 kilometers short of the Arctic Circle. Can I have a drink of water, please? Could I have a drink of water, please? He nods, yes. I'll have to grab it. So I wrote a book. This book will be... I'm going to have a drink of water. Smile and wave, Christian, smile and wave. I told you this one was going to be different. Thank you. And this has been translated into at least 3 different languages. There's several more that are in the works right now. Today is like the first day officially of the release of the French translation of the book. They'll both be available outside. In that book, I explain the process by which we interact with a piece of property. If we're going to design something that's ecologically sustainable, we have to design it after the actual ecology of the place. We can grow saguaro cactus here if we want. With what expense? We can grow, cucumbers in Greenland if we want to. At what expense? There are plants, and there are plant communities and animal communities that will live anywhere on the planet. And if we design our agriculture after those communities, number one, that will be our best chance of success right there. Well, a lot of our plants, most plants, our agricultural crops, will survive without several critical nutrients. That's why we have fertilizers and compost and all that. But the one thing that we know that our crops will not grow without is water. So what we want to do is optimize our rainfall distribution on the site by changing our tillage pattern, or at least our farming pattern. Third is we'll establish woody polycultures, not just single monocultures, but polycultures, many different plants and communities of plants. And then we'll use the agroforestry practices to do that, and then we'll manage for complexity. We just understand that we don't live in a simple world, and we're going to live with complexity and learn how to design our systems so it'll be easy for us to handle the complexity. Also, I didn't put it in there because it's a given. We're going to design systems that are economically profitable, because if it's not paying our bills, it's nothing but an expense and we're not going to do it. So number one, identify our biome and our plant communities, and then we'll substitute improved cultivars when they're possible. And when there aren't improved cultivars, we'll actually breed our own improved cultivars using mass selection. We don't need all kinds of crazy stainless steel factories and facilities genetically engineering plants for us when we have seeds. In the part of Wisconsin where we settle, we have, my wife and I have 2 properties in Alaska, several properties in maritime northeastern Maine, and the first slide you saw is in southwestern Wisconsin, right here, right at the tension zone between prairie and savanna and northern conifer forests and the oak savanna. Every biome, every plant community around the world, we can look at it, and there are perennial plants. These are in order of height. Tall trees that produce nuts, medium trees, that produce fruits, bushes that produce nuts, more bushes or trees or small trees, ground-growing cherries as well, cane fruits, grapes, vines, currants, shade-tolerant, grasses, animals, and then fungi to decompose the whole thing. Every single one of those elements in there is a marketable product and a marketable crop. We can design an agricultural system that's 100% agricultural mimicked, and we grow it as a complex system. Number two, which is most interesting, is the optimizing the rainfall distribution pattern. Our landforms are generally shaped by the impact of water flowing to the lowest spot and hill and going away. It takes topsoil with it, even if you have a full ground cover. You can see here, this is in California, probably 10 to 15 centimeters of rain a year on this particular property, but we can see evidence of erosion. How is it that they only get 10 to 15 centimeters of rain, but there's still erosion from water? The current practice to deal with this is to make this big, huge, gigantic dam. You have to beg for government money to get it, and then you finally get this government money and they put it down the bottom. It requires, civil engineers and licensed contractors to put it in place. You make this big, huge pond that now has a potential for a catastrophic blowout, and the water's down the bottom of the hill, and it doesn't do anything to help you up in the upslopes. It does not address this problem in the first place. This water is still going to run in a road before it gets caught there. This is being done all over the world. It's not a very useful practice, not very helpful. We're implementing a system that's a combination of a number of different practices. We're calling it the master line system. We begin high in the landscape, and we start by excavating holes in the ground, search capacity dugouts. Sometimes I'm reluctant to call it ponds, because in some places the word pond is regulated by government authority and you can't do it without a license, and on and on and on and on. So we make shallow little depressions in the earth, and miraculously when it rains, water goes there. It then fills up, and by changing our farming pattern, whether we're grazing, whether we're using tillage or no-till, we just change the pattern so that our fields are now going to go slightly downhill from contour. So any water that tries to run down these little valleys here just hits wheel tracks, tillage patterns, or swales or terraces, and starts to drift back out towards the ridge. So if you get 15 centimeters of rain out here on the ridge, it keeps going back out to the ridge. Everybody notices that in the valleys it's wetter. If you get 15 centimeters of rain on the ridge, it runs the valley. The valley now gets like 65 centimeters of rain. It's wetter. The ridge gets less because it ran off to the valley. And this way we keep spreading the water out towards the ridges, and we keep field edges parallel so equipment is easy to use. Very efficient. It's very inexpensive, because at times we don't even need to use any kind of excavations at all. We just change the pattern of the farming. If we do use tools, they're usually common tillage tools: 1 bottom plows, 2 bottom plows, front end loaders, a scraper blade. And it eliminates the potential for catastrophic failure, because what we're not doing is we're not concentrating all this water into one spot. We're actually distributing it out, so there's less chance of catastrophic failure. And if it ever does overflow in a very big rain event, the worst possible scenario is the fact that the water goes back to doing what it was doing anyways. So the pattern that you see, this is the farm in Wisconsin. This has had 20 years of site development. It started as a maize and soybean and hay field planted in contour strips, according to the USDA. Well, this new pattern is slightly off contour, so any water that tries to come down this valley gets spread out to the ridges. And we live in a part of the Midwestern USA that we get about 30 inches of rain, so just less than a meter of rain a year. Sometimes it comes in 2 storms. And when it comes down, it doesn't matter what kind of soils you have, it doesn't matter what kind of cover you have. When you get 30 centimeters of rain in an hour, it's gone. With the terraces and swales and small little collector ponds, the water now spreads out to the ridges and soaks in. Why is this important? Because now we have water in our soil that's available to grow more crops. And we're going to grow more crops because we're going to plant way more trees than the law might allow us to. Oh, by the way, we aren't allowed to necessarily do more than so many trees per hectare either in agroforestry systems if we take the government money. From day one, we said we will not take any government subsidies. The very first year that we took over, the farmer prior to that, the average loss per acre in our part of Wisconsin was a $117 loss per acre every single year. They had to take the subsidies in order to pay their bills. From the very first year, we were profitable. Look at the research from the Woody Perennial Polyculture University of Illinois in Urbana. From the very first year when they set up their research site in agroforestry, a complex multi-species agroforestry system, the very first year they beat corn on return per acre. These are profitable systems. And you can see the extent of these ponds. These are not intended to be fish ponds or swimming holes. It's just that after a large rain, they fill up, the water goes out to the ridge, goes out to the ridge. And one of the things that's notable about this, here we see some strips. This is in garden vegetables. We sell wholesale produce. This has been under cultivation for 15 years, tillage, about every third year, extensive use of cover crops. Somehow, in 15 years of tillage agriculture, we've turned a red clay farm into black topsoil. Look at the neighbor's red clay across the street. This is all no-till GMO corn and soy. There was no agriculture happening here, and it's still red clay. We had agriculture happening here. We're doing something different. We're saving the water, capturing it in the ground, using a different pattern, and we're using agroforestry techniques. This is what our soil used to look like. 15 years, it turned into this. This is absolutely entirely possible at a profit. This is not something that we have to sacrifice horribly in order to turn red clay into topsoil. This is a byproduct of the agriculture that we do. This is a byproduct of the agriculture we do. Somebody said they want to get me carbon sequestration money for my black soil. I said, well, that's cute. Let's use it somewhere else. Establish woody perennial polycultures using the agroforestry practices. Our silvo-arable systems, alley cropping. The alley crop is really significant. This is our cash flow in the early years, while our woody crop takes time to mature. And in our case, we're not just planting single species in most cases. In our tree species, we're planting multiple species. Sometimes we're planting them all in the same row. Sometimes the rows close together, different species in every row. And this is the cash crop while the woody species mature. And over time, as we need less and less of the annual crop, we put in more and more rows of perennials until you saw that aerial photo of the whole entire farm. It's almost entirely, it's 97 or 98% perennial now, the whole entire cropping system. I like the photograph that somebody showed of willows between rows of high-value timber trees. I went with perennials between many of our rows of trees, asparagus in this case. It's probably one of the most productive areas on the farm as far as returns per acre is asparagus. And in the tree rows, these are chestnut with mulberry, elderberry, raspberry, grapes. We're part of a fuel cooperative where a number of farmers grow oilseed crops to press for motor fuel, and then the press cake becomes feed for our livestock. So we can design systems that are profitable from day one and actually produce enough fuel to run themselves. The average size farm in my part of Wisconsin, people who participated in this program, you only require 10% of your acre to be put into an oil crop, and that will run your whole farm. That'll fuel your whole entire farm. And of course, you still have the press cake left over, which is livestock feed, protein-concentrated livestock feed. This is all by design. I like this word right here, disturbed. Apples are a large component of our system, probably 30%. It's one of the big three. Chestnuts, hazelnuts, and apples are our big three woody crops. Can anybody see the apple trees in here? Well, guess what? The pests can't see them either. This is a fully intact three-dimensional ecosystem, and sometimes trees die. And when trees die, you know what? Good riddance. I don't want trees that get diseases and die. If they get diseases, they're out of here. I only want the ones that thrive with sheer, total, utter neglect. I call that stunt. That's how nature works. We have grapes and chestnut, hazelnut, roses, apples. This is a little bit distracting. I did this on purpose. This is looking across the rows. These are actually very distinct rows, and if you look down the chairs this way, You can see down the rows between every single row of trees here. And don't say that it doesn't yield. We don't get the production that you can in other systems. And not only is this a certified organic system, this is a no-spray system. We come into an ecological balance. We have, where previously it was bare dirt and soya, we now have 7 different species of amphibians eating insects for us. We have 3 or 4 different species of songbird that perch at different levels in the system that are eating all our insects. There's a lot of research on bird and insectivity in agroforestry systems. We use silvopasture somewhat extensively. This is a system of walnut. There's cherries, quite a few cherries in here, and mulberry, all of which are cropped. Mulberry foliage has more protein in it than alfalfa hay. And when the mulberries are falling off the trees, you will not see the pigs anywhere else other than under mulberry trees. Their noses are purple, their back ends are purple. Happy, happy pigs. And happy cows. We've only had 2 sick cows in 20 years of farming this way. And if you're ever going to do agroforestry, you need to know what a cowie is and what a dog is. And of course, we're going to manage for complexity. You know, none of these pictures that you saw were simple systems yet. Okay, this is probably the simplest one. It's like trees over grass, very simple. This is one of my favorites in that it shows several different things. Once again, it's taken across the row. In the back, we see hazelnuts. So there's a row of hazelnuts. Then there's an alley of pasture. And then there's a row of chestnuts with currants growing underneath in the shade of the chestnuts. Then there's an alley of pasture. And then a row of elderberries with raspberries in the same row. And then every 15 meters or so, there'll be a mulberry tree with grapes trellised on the mulberries. Now, a lot of people, when you hear about grapes being trellised on a tree, they think, oh my goodness, the vine's going to strangle the tree and pull it down all over the place. This is a managed system. We prune our trees, we prune our grapes. It's a managed system, so they don't have negative interactions. It's my job to be an ecosystem manager. I'm not a cattle person. I'm not a pig person. I'm not a produce grower. I'm not a grain grower. I'm an ecosystem manager. That's how we need to think about ourselves in the future, because if agroforestry is really going to progress from here, we need to create new ecosystems to perform all these ecosystem services that we need and produce the food that we need. So these pigs also came in. What you don't see here is the cows, because the cows are here yesterday, the pigs are here today. Is this applicable in Europe? By imitating our natural plant communities, you know, it's applicable everywhere. Everywhere that has plants, you just arrange the plants that have economic and food and feed value in such a way that we can plant them mechanically, maintain them mechanically, harvest them, and process them. This same oak savanna plant family that was native to North America is native to Europe, all through Central Europe. In moister areas with richer soil, there's a whole entirely different plant community that focuses around the walnuts, the walnut family. And then in higher, drier regions, pinus, the pine nuts. Man, has anybody ever bought pine nuts lately? Like 20 euro for a little jar in the store the other day? It's ridiculous. And this right here, this is the silvo-arable standard. As agroforesters, we are infinitely more complex than someone who's just growing maize, because we have one more factor in there called trees. Well, let's amp it up. Let's now start following ecological processes. Let's start using trees that have yields that come from them. I don't care if the federal government is going to allow me to have fruit and nut-bearing trees in my agroforestry system, because I'm actually going to make money from my fruit and nut trees, and I don't necessarily make money off of Fraxinus for 30 years. So I would, in University of Missouri, Columbia, we've already shown several different enterprise budgets. If corn in Upper Midwest was losing $117 an acre, and chestnuts make $6,000 an acre, plus, which one would you choose? I'm going to choose chestnuts. Well, I still have to cash flow this year, so am I going to grow corn in between? Well, maybe, if I have all of the infrastructure in place. Maybe not. Well, if I was a farmer driving this combine down the road, after hearing this talk, I'd be looking at all of this empty space saying, oh my goodness, look at the missed opportunities here. I can put in a row of currants over here, There's not enough shade. A lot of people say, oh, the shade will kill the stuff. There's no shade in here. There's little bits of shade. If there is any shade, we go manage that by lopping off branches, pollarding the trees, and feeding it to our cattle. How do you like that, Alan? I mentioned pollarding. On the other side, I would put in a row of raspberries. Well, perhaps they need to be held up with wires. While I'm stringing wires to hold up the currant and the raspberries, I might as well string up a wire to trellis the grapes on. So instead of just having Fraxinus over soya that looks like from here, I can now have chestnuts over grapes, over raspberries, over currants, and soy. How many different crops was that? I can't count that high. I only have 9 fingers. The past few days I've toured a number of farms, which is really fabulous. I've seen lots of small grains looking pretty good, and I've seen a lot of erosion, tremendous amount of erosion. Farmers planting their crops straight up and downhill, which is kind of ridiculous. And I've also seen probably 30 to 40% bare soil. So if you think about 30 to 40% bare soil, is that producing anything right now? Nothing. The soil is eroding, it's blowing away in the wind, washing away in the rain. And yet in the ditches on the side of the road, over and over and over again, I could only put 3 pictures here. I've got probably 100 pictures of this. This is the wild craziness. It's not nature as in like historical nature. This is the stuff that actually thrives here with 0 inputs. This is 100% yield. All we have to do as agroforesters is learn how to design this and make it so it's easily manageable, harvestable, maintainable. Right in here, this farmer could be getting 13 different harvestable yields today. Now, this actually has global implications. Just last Monday, I was informed that this project is going forward entirely without any international banking or federal money. The Primate Conservation and Food Sovereignty through Restoration Agriculture Project is beginning in western Uganda. We start with the schools and have them beginning to establish plant nurseries, and then we create buffer zones. The idea here is to link all of the large primate preserves through riparian buffer strips that have improved primate habitat, and then to improve the nutrition and health of the diets of the people in the villages. The first 5 years have already been funded through private research, and our previous 5 years, we've shown proof of concept that within 3 years, the project is cash flowing itself and pays its own way. So this is a profitable venture being undertaken, led by the children. This was our first pilot project that we did. We started, it was very small rainfall, monsoon-type weather, extremely hot, tropical, obvious. We start with the school. We need to know how many people do we feed, what kind of nutrition do they need, what kind of plant systems can we grow, and how do we make sure that they have alleys in between to continue their typical tillage agriculture with their beans and their maize. So these are polyculture systems designed to catch water and grow a tremendous amount of food year-round. So here's a year 3 picture. By year 5, this is a fellow, this is me. They call this guy Babu Mapandamiti. He's a grandfather who plants trees. By year 5, they had food security. They're feeding the school. The kids planted it. They're learning. Their lessons are coming from it. All their science lessons, math. How many different class lessons can you come up with this? The curriculums have been designed to teach this in the schools. By year 5, there's a nutritional diversity. Part of the program is we're tracking health data for all of the children who are involved in this, heights and weights and basic nutritional dietary configuration. Also, economic surplus is part of it. I'd mentioned by year 3, there's already been several businesses started that are funding the project. One is a produce distribution system. Another is a hot pepper sauce. There's some guest lodges and soap being produced out of the system. Is there a difference between the alley soil and the soil underneath that tree system? We don't need more research to tell us what works and what doesn't work. These systems are going in broad acre, successfully, financially successfully, below the radar of many different people because we don't have time to mess around and apply for crazy grants. What we're doing is ecological restoration. We are restoring primate habitat, improving primate habitat at a profit. We're feeding people, educating people. We're doing it at scale. We're doing it around the world. So keep an eye on this project here. We're going to be going as big and as public as we possibly can really soon. I wrote a book. Did I mention that? Restoration Agriculture. It's available for sale out at the back table, both in English and in French. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for the water, Chris.
Wow, that was an amazing presentation. Very quick by Mark. A little bit less than 30 minutes. I know that we've got a few questions here, and I got a note from Jeffrey that there's at least a chance that we might have Mark available to us by phone here in just a little bit. And now Stephanie's shaking her head saying that no, it doesn't look like that's happened. Jeffrey sent another message saying no, not going to be. But we actually have some other videos we're going to show here. I'm going to look at the questions real quick, and please put your questions in here. If we don't get them answered by Mark tonight, we will absolutely get them answered either between now and next week or when Mark is on with us live next week. And again, we could not have expected this was going to happen with Mark as it did here. So anyway, Sue has a question. Actually, this is about the Facebook page, and I mentioned this earlier. So Sue, I realized we screwed up and didn't realize that by choosing a secret Facebook page, it was secret to everybody, unless you remember. I thought that you could actually go in and ask to join, and then we would approve you. The reality is we actually have to have you ask separately. Well, we're assuming that everybody that's already a member wants to be in the community. We'll actually add you all, and then as we move ahead next week and in future weeks, as new people come in, we'll probably ask them to ask us to want to be able to come in and be members. So again, apologize for that, but we're learning as we come along here, so that's the reason that you couldn't find that. Stephen here has a question. Does the clay subsoil prevent drainage in the pond so the water makes it to the distribution channels, or do the ponds have to be lined? And I'm assuming that that's related to Mark's property. I think I know the answer on his. They do not have to be lined, and therefore they are going to, as the water either evaporates, hopefully actually before it evaporates, it will spread. In some places linings are required, in some places they're not. And again, I'll let Mark go ahead and answer that more specifically and broadly next week or through the week here. Sue said, okay, thanks, which I think related to our comments about the Facebook page. We have got 3 other little videos, actually 4 of them. They're very short, and these are really cool. Nobody's seen these. This is the first time we're showing these that Mark did, and they're all going to be pretty self-explanatory. They actually are, and one of the problems that we're having with this platform, GoToWebinar, is that videos get stilted, and that's why we couldn't just show you a video that we had of Mark at the European Agroforestry Conference. Instead, we had to show a slideshow because they get so stilted you really just can't even hardly see them, and they're out of focus and so on. These that we're going to show are actually just single the variety of pictures, so it's not going to be as much of a problem. You're actually going to be a little bit louder in the audio also. So I'm going to go ahead and go to them, and here's the first one, and I'm going to start it playing now. And
just explain a little bit a management technique that I wrote about in my book Restoration Agriculture called STUN. Now in my book, STUN was described as sheer total utter neglect. It's more accurately described as strategic total utter neglect. And how I discovered that is the very first year at New Forest Farm, I had bought perhaps 500 trees from nurseries all over the country to get a diversity of genetic material. And with my dad's help, he had one of these little golf club weed hackers and cut the weeds down, and I'd chunk out the sods and plant these trees by hand. Then, of course, all summer long, my intention was to do perfect weed control, mulch as many as I could, water them regularly, and I found out that I could only keep up with so many. I could do so much weed control and so much mulch and so much watering because I just had not enough time. There were so many things that I was doing that I couldn't keep up with taking care of all the trees the way I wanted to and the way all the books say that I should. So I found out at the at the end of the season, the next spring actually, when I tried to see who was the survivors, where I did the perfect immaculate weed control and mulch and water, I had a really high survival rate. The trees were looking pretty good. Then I went to the area where I had neglected them. I didn't intend to neglect them. I just didn't take care of them because I couldn't. When I got to the trees that I neglected, son of a gun, they looked good. It was a pretty high survival rate. So I started to think to myself, what are the things that we are taught, that we read about and hear about, that we're told that we should do and have to do in order to have our plants survive? And I started to do less and less of those things to see which ones were the critical, strategically critical ones. And with tree planting, what I found out most is in the early years, first 3 years or so, it is watered fairly regularly and a little bit of weed control, enough weed control so that there's not too much competition with grasses or whatever. The stun technique even applied to my produce operation. We were growing certified organic produce as our cash crop, and we were in wholesale markets. And since we were selling to wholesale markets, the price per pound is fairly low. So we did a large planting. At one point in time, I had about 12 acres of produce. And it was just myself and my wife that were managing it at the time. And those of you who have done produce operations, most CSA type operations with 10, 15, 20 different types of produce have half a dozen or more people working just to keep the few acres going. Well, we were doing dozens of acres. And so what we found out is you till the soil, you plant your plants or you plant your seeds, and then do minimal weed control, maybe cultivate once or twice, maybe if you get around to it, hoe a little bit. And what we found out over time, once again, not because we intended to, we just couldn't keep up with 12 acres, just couldn't keep up with 12 acres. Where we did immaculate weed control, yeah, we got better yields and you know, more fruit, etc. Squash, for example, cucumbers and zucchini. But on the place where we just had minimal weed control, you know, just cultivate once and there's still weeds all growing through the patch, sure, we got a few less fruit, maybe a slightly smaller fruit, but we got outstanding deer control, because the deer couldn't find the fruit. We didn't have a lot of bird damage, pecking holes in the fruit because they couldn't find the fruit. And the amount of labor that we didn't have to do was huge. So it kind of has led me down the path of how little can we do to have our plants survive. And the least amount of work that we can do is if we plant naturally adapted plant communities that grow in our area. And in southwest Wisconsin, for example, it was the whole oak savanna family with the Fagaceae, which are oak, chestnut, beech, apple, hazel, cherry, plum, raspberry, grape, currants, gooseberries, and forage all around. If we plant natural systems, our maintenance goes down to practically zero. Pest and disease control are taken care of by ecological processes. Weed control and fertility come from our grazing animals in the system. So stun, strategic, total, utter neglect. That's how nature does it.
So, Mark's used that term stun. You've heard it several times today. You'll hear it more over time. What do you think about that? If you've got any comments or questions about that, maybe throw it out here. I'm just going to stop and we'll move to another little video here. But this is actually taken. Mark was speaking out in the field at my ranch. So this picture in the background is, about midway from a north-south direction along a valley in a field that's about 25 acres. And from where Mark's standing to the ridge that you see to the left, that's 600 feet of vertical elevation gain. If you were to go to the right of Mark, and you sort of could see the panoramic view, that same kind of slope would be present, and up another little bit more, 650 feet or so, but very different both geography and geology. On to the right, and one of these other videos is going to show this a little bit more, is all wooded, timbered. It's a ponderosa pine forest, and the geology is sandstone to the right, and the geology to the left here is granitic, very interesting sort of circumstance. Below Mark's shoulder, or his head and his shoulder, is a series of ponds that we've built on this property 10 years ago. 10 years ago, this was an overgrazed, horribly overgrazed cattle pasture. The stream had sought protection and had gone underground, and everybody that had even been there had said, oh, there's no stream there. And now we have a 3-acre pond that is just literally right over the blue top of Mark's shirt there, and then it winds around a little bit, and then there are 11 more ponds that are up from where his shirt is. I don't know if you see my cursor, but from about right here in the picture going this way, the headwaters onto the property is actually above the top of this picture. This is a chicken. We have 1,000 chickens that live free-ranged in this farm, not actually down here on the flats. This is right near our hatchery area and nursery. The chickens live. Questions from the group? Okay, so let's move to the second video.
This is just a little pocket that happened naturally here on the hillside. We've got 2 trees next to each other, and somehow this stone ended up being placed between them. Instead of just cutting the ladder fuels and laying the brush across the slope, we can take stone and lay it across the slope. So much of Europe, all the way through the Middle East, up through Greece and Italy, I've seen this over and over and over again into Spain, have these little stone terraces, and that accumulates organic matter up behind it. So all these pine needles, pine cones, other leaves that blow in, the other plants that happen to grow in there, we're accumulating a little bit of organic matter. We're actually making soil in that little pocket right there. It may not look like much here, and because it's so arid in this area, it's going to be slower than if we did that someplace in a more humid environment. This is how we make soil, right on the spot. No compost piles necessary, no hauling and moving stuff, other than the fact that at first put a little barrier of rocks up just to catch the organic matter. Rabbit poop will tumble into there, deer will bed down and poop and pee in there. This is a little fertility hotspot. It's a natural example of soil building. So this is like that same tree, and now its roots have been in that crack. And just that mechanical barrier catching needles on the uphill side of it to make a little bit of soil on the top. That's an incredible tree. This is just a little
quick. Sorry, I just want to quickly show this. So, and I didn't state this earlier. Where Mark was previously is now down from this. This is probably 200 feet elevation gain up in this fairly sparse, actually. It's not a dense ponderosa pine forest, very mature, however. And just give you a context of timing, this was in the late September. There had probably not been any rainfall here since mid-June, so July, August, September, 3 months, no rainfall, completely dry land. And yet, again, the sun, the way it's shining, you're not seeing it. But fairly green still, and quite a bit of production. So there's where Mark, that's a cool little video pointing out some things here. We're going to show another one.
What we have here is a beautiful example of natural restoration agriculture in motion on the rocks itself. No soil whatsoever. Lichens float around in the atmosphere and they land. And for whatever reason, they start growing. A lichen is a symbiotic relationship between an algae and a fungus. And the algae is the green. It photosynthesizes and produces some sugars that will feed the fungus, and the fungus exudes certain chemicals that will dissolve the solid rock. So they take the solid rock with sunlight from the rock into their own bodies. Then the lichens will eventually crumble and die. And as they do, they'll decompose. And they make, this is the beginnings of topsoil. So what happens then is there's enough dead lichen bodies after a while. It holds a little bit more water, so a little bit of a biological sponge. If you notice here in this little spot, there was enough of a depression to collect a little bit more organic matter. Pretty soon there was enough decomposed lichen and perhaps pine needles and pine pollen catkins that the mosses could begin to grow. And as time goes on, pretty soon you can get some grasses established. Eventually you can get your woody plants established. A little prickly pear cactus established under here as well. What I find particularly noticeable, for one, nobody tilled this soil, nobody made compost, nobody irrigated it, nobody had pumps, bells, and whistles or anything, and nature itself has created soil. And so when we use this brilliant technology, this is how the planet has become covered with green living things. This is how you make topsoil. So if we now go out to our landscape, we figure out a way to obstruct the movement of organic matter, perhaps lay a branch across the slope, needles will accumulate, they'll start to decompose, starts to turn into soil, have some channels in the ground that bring water to our particular collection spot. That's where we can put a valuable species that will produce some sort of crop. Either our nopales growing on our prickly pear cactus or pinon pine, grasses to be grazed by livestock. Let's see if we got any kind of soil going on down here. I bet you'll have something. Look at that. Dirt. Where did the dirt come from? This biological system made the soil. That's our whole entire point with the restoration agriculture systems. We can start with a bare rock and we can farm it.
So that was a pretty revealing little video. We're going to actually be using that sort of in a promo sense. Don't know why my computer's not wanting to go away from the screen. Come on. Get smaller here, computer. What's going on with you? Click. Quit. Uh-oh. Come on. Technology's amazing. Usually I just hit escape. There we go. Thank you, computer. That little video, 3 minutes, really sums up agroecology, restoration agriculture, regenerative agriculture, the way we're now calling it economic agriculture. So one more, real quick, and we're actually doing real good, coming up on time. I see there's a couple more questions there. I'm going to get to those before we finish. And again, I may not have the answers, but I'll get them from Mark.
Hanging out in a small grove here of honey locust trees. Looks to me like there's 1, 2 rows, 3 rows of them planted. Current landowner tells me that these were planted about 10 years ago. Although honey locusts are a legume in the Leguminosae family, they don't have the nitrogen-fixing nodules on their root. Their foliage does contribute a lot of nitrogen when it decomposes. But one of the most distinguishing characteristics of these big, gigantic pods, the pods, they're kind of flat, and inside they have a really hard brown bean, and the bean is surrounded with sugar. And I've read it places where the sugar, the percentage is like 18% sugar, which is an incredibly high percentage of sugar. And what's amazing about them is the beans are rock hard, and they're designed to go through the digestive system of a ruminant and then be excreted out the back in a nice pile of manure. And so once upon a time, honey locusts were browsed by Pleistocene megafauna, which included camelids, ground sloths, 2 different species of giraffe. And that's a perfect way for a tree to spread itself, is to be so hard, the seed is so hard it's almost indigestible. It has a seed coat on it that if you soak the seed in water, it expands tremendously. It's a really slimy, gelatinous seed coat on it. I've actually dried those pods and ground them up in a flour mill and added it with pancake batter to make pancakes. It's an incredibly drought-resistant tree. I don't know if it would survive on only 10 inches of rain a year, but definitely it's working here down in the lower area with a little bit more soil, so probably with some water management structures we can get them to survive. So we have here a handful of honey locust pods. You can see inside where the beans are located. These are not mature, they're not ripe yet. I've torn this one open so we can get inside and see a little bean. Right now it's pretty soft. You could use this as like a lima bean in cooking if you want. And this greener material here, this is where the sugars are accumulating. So you peel the two layers off, and this will all be crystalline sugar. When this pod gets brown and dry, this will be hard as a rock, and all this green stuff will have turned into a nice brown crystalline sugar. What's interesting about it is if you look on a lot of ingredient labels, product labels, you'll see what's called locust bean gum. Well, locust is used as an industrial product worldwide. There's machines used for the cultivation of it as a huge, large-scale agricultural crop. And yet somehow in the U.S. it's skipped our attention and faded from our general agricultural usage. So we could have new varieties of honey locust. Look at all the green in there. That's what's going to turn into sugar. It's in the process right now of accumulating all the sugars. That's bright green. We could be making sugars from this. Obviously, we've got the bean. It's an incredible animal feed. Cattle like it. Sheep like it. I imagine alpacas would like it because they're so similar to sheep. Actually, in one book that I've read, J. Russell Smith's Tree Crops. It's dated material, but they were looking at varieties, because way back in the 20s and 30s, agricultural research stations actually were researching tree crops as a viable agricultural crop in the USA. And then they said if with one variety of honey locust grown in your pasture, Millador, if you had 50 trees per acre, that's the equivalent of 50 bushels of corn per acre is being grown in addition to all the pasture that you already get. So it's an excellent silvopasture tree. The one drawback that I've noticed with honey locusts is most of them have really long thorns. These ones don't, so it makes me suspect, that these are, there are selections that are thornless honey locusts. They've been bred for the landscape trade, and that's where he might have got these, are thornless honey locusts. And there's also breeding being done for the landscape trade, thornless and podless. And if you look at these, we had 3 pods on maybe 50 trees. I have a feeling that's where these came from, the landscape trade selection process. So these are already pre-selected to be low yielders. You'd be better off driving around somewhere and finding a natural growth that usually around January, February, you'll see all the brown pods hanging from the trees like ribbons. That's when they start falling from the trees. That's the time to go ahead and harvest them. And that's when the sugars in here will be all dry and crystalline and crunchy.
Again, this is another spot on our property. Just to give you a little context, it's a grove of locust, and we also have ash in this area. If you notice, it looks like a couple different kinds of trees. This is right below the dam for that pond that we showed earlier. Mark gave a little bit of an allusion to rainfall. Typically, we average under 15, around 13 inches of rainfall per year at this location. The particular year this was done, we had a lot more rainfall than that. We actually had 24 inches between the 1st of May and the middle of June. And then, as I mentioned, after that, it would have been completely dry. Main thing I'm showing here is a little bit of diversity. People don't think about this as they think about the Mountain West very often. We get profit, we get revenue from a whole bunch of different kinds of things that we do in a diversification of farming here, which is what we hope that all of you are going to be thinking about. So that's kind of the end of our formal presentation, and we're right up against time. I'm going to go back to the questions here. Actually, a couple comments that I know that we've had, and I already have looked at them. I'm pretty sure Mark's going to have to really help to answer them, but let me just read the first one. I'm just starting on growing fruit trees from seed, but so far I have about 15 peach trees planted out and have only released them from weeds a few times. 2 of them are 3 years old and the rest are 2 years. The 3-year-old trees are looking really good, so I'll be interested in what happens re the fruit this coming spring. The 2-year-old trees are smaller, of course, but all have survived and are growing, and that's great. What a great story, and I think that comes from Sue. And yes, from Sue. And I think I remember this right. I think Sue's in New Zealand, so this is not another U.S. situation. I hope all the rest of those of you that are on that are from different parts of the world get acquainted. And again, we're going to get to where you'll be on the Facebook site, so you'll be able to do that. And then another comment here. Unfortunately, possums love honey locusts. Love honey locusts. Despite the vicious thorns, they don't even wait for the pods. They just eat the flowers and the leaves, break the trees down, and so we don't even get the benefit of nicely shaped timber. And who is this saying this? This was also Sue. Yeah, I agree with you on that. We've been very fortunate here at this location in that we don't have possums, for one, and we do have raccoons, but I don't know why, but we've only seen them once on this farm in 10 years. And they were actually in some Russian olives that are just up gradient from where we're seeing these trees. One time, and I was going to get my gun out and get rid of those little buggers, but they were gone. Didn't need to do that. So anyway, we're right up against it. That was the last question here. If anybody else has got additional questions, again, we'll make sure that Mark asks them. Thank you so much for coming. Please look at the replays, get some more knowledge from this. There's been so much that Mark's given us over the last 3 weeks, even though he's only been with us live for all of one session. But he's just all the replays and different things that we have. Thank you to my staff that have helped here, to Stephanie, to Mark, to Jeffrey. It's 2 in the morning where he's at. To Deb, if she's out there. Thank you so much, everybody, and we will see you next Wednesday for our Restoration Agriculture series. Know that you can also come to our Aquaculture series. It's on Monday nights. I think even by next week we're going to be able to be starting a 3rd series that'll be on another day of the week, and our growth, and we'll just keep adding them. Keep telling your friends about this. Thank you. Good evening from Colorado, and we'll talk to you all later.